Marshall and Saagar here. Welcome back to the Realignment. Hey everyone, by now you know the deal. We're doing these expanded discussion episodes because of Supercast. So if you want to support the show, support our expanded coverage, you can go to realignment.supercast.com, or you could go to the top of the show notes. I want to tell a quick story about this, Saagar. I got an email from someone who subscribed after our last discussion episode, and they said, hey, I just signed up. It took a while, and it was kind of clunky and awkward, but I finally have it. And here's the invoice for the subscription. It turned out this person had signed up for Simplecast, which is our podcast
it's a
backdrop
podcast
service provider.
Yeah.
So please, people, this is on me. I will be reaching out to this person to Venmo them a refund because I was not clear enough in my diction. Realignment.supercast.com. Not Simplecast. Simplecast is not set up to be easy to sign up for, or someone probably had to go through a bunch of things there. So that's that. So sorry to that. And I will be hitting you up for a Venmo repayment. This is a one-time offer, by the way, people. This will never be happening ever again. So on to the actual episode. I want to start with a story that came totally out of nowhere, but it's a part of a broader theme. Supply crunches, us not really having access to things, and it's this baby formula story. Saagar, do you want to just quickly introduce what is happening here, and then I'll get into a really good write-up on the topic that Derek Thompson, friend of the show from The Atlantic, wrote up.
Yeah, this has been on my radar for a little while. I've been vaguely aware of it for the past couple of weeks, but it really bubbled to the surface, I would say, in the last couple of days. So there is a massive baby formula shortage in America. I think about 50% of the normal stock is out, and retailers are actually rationing baby formula at major chains: Walgreens, Target, Costco. Amazon has almost a 2-month backlog, and there's a multifaceted variety of reasons kind of as to why. But a lot of new parents are understandably freaking out because the problem is that baby formula isn't 100% interchangeable. There are different types of baby formulas. Some babies actually have a lot of allergies, and so brand specific loyalty is really important for some parents. So it's not like you can just say I'll get generic baby formula. That's the case for some parents, but not necessarily for all. It's really a nightmare situation for a lot of people out there. There's price gouging going on. There's discussions here about monopoly, about trade policy. I've learned more about it than I probably ever cared to. And my main takeaway, people, is I'm not giving my kids American baby formula, but we can get to that later. Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, no. So I'll get to Derek's explanation because once again, this is a good story because obviously, especially given our audience demographics, I don't think most of you are buying baby formula, but it speaks to this broader debate that we've been having ever since COVID. So Derek Thompson wrote this great piece. We'll link this in the Substack that went out on Friday and also in the show notes. 3 reasons why this is happening. So number 1 is bacteria. There was two infants actually died because of an infection that came from a specific plant. I think it was in Michigan.
Yep,
so that actually meant that, folks, huge just supply crunch. And then to Saagar's point, and this leads to the next part of it, there actually only are 3 or 4 actual producers of baby formula in the US. And it's interesting. This happens because, as Derek points out, the FDA partners. There's this program where it's basically guarantees baby formula for poor mothers. So that's a great policy. Totally support that. But what that means is that the FDA is actually the biggest single purchaser of baby formula in the entire country. And because they're the biggest purchaser, much as Texas is with textbooks, much as all these different dynamics, they effectively set who gets to win and lose in the markets because of their contracting process. And this happens in all sorts of spaces. This happens in defense contracting with, Boeing and Lockheed and all these companies. There's actually only 3 or 4 places they actually do business with. So to your point, Saagar, this is the oligopoly thing. There isn't that competitive of a space. And then the final bit here, on the supply issue, and this is just really interesting, it's been really tough to predict the way the market actually goes. So in April 2020, just like all of us were purchasing toilet paper, paper towels, all these things and stocking up, mothers stocked up on baby formula. And look, it's not as if you need that much baby formula day to day. So like they stocked up for months and months and months, which really screwed with the supply chains. So it was very hard for those 3 or 4 producers to actually predict how much they were going to need. Because then if you've got 6 months of baby formula, you're not buying baby formula in September the way you were going to. So then like once the lockdowns ended, people started, going out and buying it again. So it meant that you had this perfect storm of those things. And then the final bit here is just the thing Saagar's referencing with Europe, which is the fact that we actually have a very high tariff against European baby formula. So there's 2 levels of this. So there's one, and Saagar, I'd like you to get into this with your reference to the European thing, but so Saagar will hit the whole like regulation part, but there's just like a huge tariff on importing baby formula. And I think this is just interesting because there's this whole debate about how like we should be like resilient and we need to, be able to produce things on our own. But it seems in this case specifically, this is basically like the libertarian nightmare scenario, in that it turns out the Europeans just actually are better at baby formula than we are. So we should like do it. So we should actually think to ourselves, hey, do we need to ultra specialize in baby formula, or should we have a trade policy that gets better baby formula to us? But Saagar, why is it better?
Well, a fix on trade policy isn't going to fix everything, to be fair. What you were referencing there is the WIC program, which we have exclusive suppliers with, and Abbott Pharmaceuticals. And this is actually a classic corporate capture story. I mean, Abbott bought back like $5.7 billion worth of its own stock back in 2020 rather than invest in new machinery, which is then where the bacterial breakout happened, which caused a 40% supply crunch in a single month. So that's part of the story. Another part of the story, very clearly, is the fact that these companies have been lobbying in order to keep out European baby formula. And look, everybody who listens to this show probably knows I'm a protectionist 100% at heart. But what I want is a robust industry here in America. And the problem that I see is that FDA is very clearly stifling both competition and actually what's healthy for your baby. So like I said, I was reading a little bit about this. There is a massive black market for wealthy Americans taking European baby formula. And the reason why is that European baby formulas actually keep milk-based proteins, whereas American baby formulas removed milk-based proteins and add plant-based additives. So there's a lot of artificial stuff in American baby formula. Second, in addition to keeping milk-based proteins, there's also something called DHA, which is a really vital compound for brain and development. I recommend everybody go listen to Dr. Rhonda Patrick and Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab podcast. DHA and EPA, stuff that you can find in nuts and in fish and a few other things, is one of the most vital compounds to brain development, to overall health, longevity, etc. So there's a lot of benefit to the European baby formula as far as I can tell. I mean, obviously, breast milk, probably the best one, but there's a variety of reasons why children or mothers and all that can't do that at home. So anyway, what I'm saying is that none of this actually has to do with health for kids, and worse, it has been completely captured by corporate interests. So in a way, it is a validation of what the libertarians say, which is that we have here like almost a total government-backed oligopoly, which then lobbies Congress and others in order to keep out much, much better competitors. And look, all I know is this is a serious problem. Maybe we can transition to the politics on this, but I was just reading the White House economic advisor gave an interview this morning, Marshall, where he said, we've been aware of this since February. So why didn't you do anything about it then? Like, what is going on? If this is an FDA backlash, fire whoever is in charge and get some of that European baby formula over here immediately. Also, I was reading about this, about the Defense Production Act. There are several facilities across the country for milk-based and other type industries, which you could convert relatively quickly to spinning out baby formula, as long as you have FDA people on site. So there's a serious state capacity problem here as well, where we are just leaving a lot of people in the lurch. And look, I get parents who DM me about this. It's a nightmare, man. I mean, parents are like swapping breast milk on Facebook. People are selling this stuff at crazy high premiums. And it's just like everything else. There's no innovative thinking at the White House in order to solve a very serious pressing problem for, I would venture to say, like probably tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah. And just to sum up my position, given everything I read from Derek and what you just said, my position is basically, look, for me, so I don't identify as a identity. I don't identify as a protectionist, but I think that key lesson from COVID is when you have these vital things, we should have the capacity to do it. So I don't need us to be 100% American made when it comes to baby formula, especially given the fact that, as you're articulating it, there's this very clear improvement from the Europeans. Like this is like if it's the 70s and the 80s, the Toyotas really were better than the Ford Pintos. That's okay.
They still are. Let's all be honest. But
look, we're trying to be on brand here. Let's just let's leave. Well, actually, I mean, we need to do a car episode. Speaking of that, because that's actually a whole thing. But basically, we should have the capacity to do this on our own if we need to, but it just shouldn't be the default, especially when there's a clear market capture. But let's get to the next big topic, which is much more like macro. Than the situation of baby formula, just the stock/crypto crash. I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Saagar. My personal perspective is I work in tech, obviously. A company I work at, On Deck, had layoffs. A bunch of companies had layoffs. There are more layoffs to come. It's wild. So that's just my personal experience. But how are you thinking about this?
Well, I mean, obviously feel bad for On Deck. I love On Deck. I love a lot of the people out there and know some of the people who lost their jobs, but that's just the bleeding edge, the indicator. And kind of what I try to emphasize on this stuff is that tech is almost always a leading indicator on the broader total market. So technology is down most out of the entire S&P 500, but all sectors are down. Manufacturing, oil and gas, seems fine, but pretty much everything else is going down in the composite indices. So that's a serious issue. And a lot of this is triggered by the worries about interest rates and Federal Reserve. And I think that we have not really grappled with the fact that cash has been cheap for almost 12 years now, maybe longer, since quantitative easing. That cheap cash was almost single-handedly propping up some of the riskiest investments, which makes sense. This is what David Sachs talked about on our podcast, which is that cheap capital was flooding technology, which is why the tech sector was down 70, 80% before the crash even happened on the public market. So I'm talking about the private tech markets versus the public market. So now the public markets are then beginning to drop as well. And I think what I'm always scared about is that when liquidity dries up, like cash and the ability for businesses in order to borrow, that's when investments get cut and that's when jobs start going. So when businesses are unable to make payroll, when businesses are not able to take out loans based upon interest rates that they thought they were going to be sustainable or not sustainable, and you combine that with an overall total market decline and decline in consumer spending, then you have a serious feedback mechanism there where you just are going to have a crunch and you're going to have more unemployment. And I think, to be honest, the Fed basically is doing what they are responding to the political pressure of the fact that we have runaway high inflation. But the problem from my perspective, and the gold standard bros can come at me if they want, is I just don't think a lot of this inflation has to do with the Fed. And that's why I actually think we're headed for a stagflation scenario, which is that the primary drivers of our inflation are the fact that the oil markets are crazy because of the Russian invasion, and that we don't produce anything here anymore and are really at the whims of global market conditions, be it pork, be it eggs, be it what else is really high? Cars, new cars. That's a result of the semiconductors, huge crunch in the used car market as a result. I mean, the vast majority of inflation that people are experiencing at home are driven by supply side factors. So if you have the Fed just sky high interest rates, well, what's going to happen is you're going to have high unemployment and you're still going to have high inflation. For example, the eggs I just talked about. Well, part of the reason eggs are so high is that bird flu just killed 10% of the chicken population in the United States. Most people don't even know that. But, you cut 10%. What do you think is going to happen? Now we have 23% year over year increase in the price of eggs. And there's all kinds of stuff.
Wait, can I ask you something though?
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
This is what I'm just trying to, you're more into this stuff at a literal level than I am. But you just kind of said, this is because we don't make things at home enough here. But like you just cited, we just lost 10% of our egg crop, and that's already domestic. So like, how do we How do we balance it? And then this also relates to the baby formula story.
Eggs actually isn't the best example, but okay, let's talk about diesel. This is a great example. Okay, so diesel right now, very, very high. Here, I can go ahead and check it right now. The national average of, there we go. We just hit the all-time high today at $5.56 for a gallon of diesel. Well, diesel input increases the price of everything, right? Because diesel is what trucks use, and diesel is also something called a middle distillate, which also includes jet fuel. Well, here's the thing. We only had one major refinery here on the East Coast, Marshall, in Philadelphia Energy Solutions. That refinery burned to the ground in July 2019. We never rebuilt it. Nothing. So in the interim, it was fine because we were importing a shit ton of diesel into New York Harbor. Well, what happened? Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia provided 50% of the diesel to Europe. Obviously, that's dramatically down. So now the Europeans, their diesel needs aren't going to go down. So they are importing and buying as much diesel on the non-Russian global market as possible. Well, that is how diesel in New York Harbor is currently going at $7 a gallon. Jet fuel and diesel are trading at $200 a barrel. So that's a perfect example. We don't have refinery capacity. And then just to subtweet the Green New Deal types, and this is the most boomer you'll ever hear me, but ideology has actually caused a lot of refineries to move, based upon tax credits and others, to refining biofuels instead of refining diesel. So not only do we not have refinery capacity on diesel itself, we also had converted our existing stock over to biofuel. So right now, we literally do not have the capacity to refine the amount of diesel that we need. And here on the East Coast, we have the lowest diesel inventory since 1996 at a time when we have one of the biggest supply crunches in modern American history, almost since the end of World War II in terms of the amount of shortages that we have in the market. So that's a great example of lack of resiliency, lack of investment by the oil and gas industry, Wall Street pressure as well, and then global market conditions that are a huge problem that's not going away. Like Russia's not going to stop invading Ukraine. Okay. If anything, it's going to get worse. The Europeans said we're going to transition off of, Germany said they're going to transition off Russian gas by winter. It's like, okay, all I see is $7 a gallon at the gas price. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just like with the baby formula story. I just keep coming back to this idea of, and once again, like, this is between the two of us, so like it doesn't really matter as much, but this debate really isn't about protectionism versus openness. It's about resiliency.
Yeah.
And that is just the part of it that I have yet to see. Even your most libertarian, rarely, if ever, just given how geopolitical these are, given the black swans of, the invasion of Ukraine, COVID itself, there's very little actual disagreement on the whole resiliency point to, yes, in an ideal world, maybe we would perfectly allocate the Russians make I was going to say the Russians do the oranges, but obviously like that's not a Russian thing, but Russia does gas and Mexico does oranges and the US does semiconductors and China does cargo ships. And we would perfectly allocate and shift these things around. But that obviously is just not the world we live in. So therefore, we should have a world that's resilient and prepared for that. And I think this goes to, a broader issue with the Biden administration, which is that it seems so much of their resiliency talk was wrapped up in Build Back Better passing.
Yes, exactly.
That was their entire articulation. And now that isn't going to pass, they should have been doing just political, rhetorical things, completely like irrespective of what's happening with Build Back Better. But you just see now that bill just doesn't pass, there's just an inability to articulate the very just nonpartisan point that I think you've been making, which is, hey, in a worst case scenario, you should be able to do things.
Yeah,
and not just be dependent on a chaotic global economic and political system.
Well, this is a point too I want to make on the ideology, and this is why it drives me nuts. The Democrats are just full of shit. Here's the truth. Like, they do not want to invest in any current ability to drill, frack, and refine gas because they're held hostage by the environmental groups. And they're like, any current investment is bullshit. So they can't vote for it. And Republicans are fully captured by natural gas and by the petroleum industry, which in the short term definitely needs some prodding in order to see. This is the interesting point.
Can you clarify? Explain what you mean by prodding?
Okay, so the gas industry right now is a crazy market. Basically, since 2009, investors poured in over $500 billion into the natural gas industry to frack the shit out of this country, which is great because they were looking for supply, all of that. Then COVID happened. These guys took one of the biggest baths of all time. They lost all of their initial upfront capital. So with gas prices now currently sky high, they are recouping all of their lost investments over the last 10 years. Therefore, major oil companies are not going to drill. The CEO of Pioneer came out and said, we will not drill if oil is $200 a barrel. As clear as day, because he's got to pay back his investors. Now, look, there are some private companies out there. They're doing a little bit of exploration. That's not going to be enough. We basically have to step in and correct this differential between Wall Street and the consumer, because the consumer is getting hosed, but the Wall Street investors are going. And this is part of the thing. Nobody wants to make these investors whole. These are all Wall Street investors who invested in oil gas, right? It's politically unpopular. But I'm sorry, I don't care. I would rather that people just pay less at the pump. So we need to step in and either guarantee a price or basically subsidize drilling, fracking, and oil production in the shortest term over the next 2 years. But the problem is, right, the Republicans, A, don't want to spend any money. B, they don't ever want to turn the spigot off. So the Democrats are like, we need to turn the spigot off now. And it's like, no, we need to turn the spigot off in like 2 years. And the Republicans are like, yeah, we never will need to turn the spigot off. So again, we have an ideological problem from both sides, captured really by groups, and people are just getting hosed. And this is the same thing that happens in the food market. Same thing that happens, baby formula, diesel. I mean, so many of these different places where you have bureaucratic, and this is why I'm just so upset with Biden. It's like, dude, this is what you were elected to do. Build back better. You know, in his speech on Build Back Better, he's like, Build Back Better will drop drug prices. Look, I support that, okay? I think most people do. Drug price is not even in the top 20 of inflationary things that Americans are experiencing at the grocery store. It's food and it's gas. Like, you should spend 99% of your time just focus on food and gas. And gas is actually one that you could definitely do. I mean, right now, you know, this is again the inartful ability of the Democrats. They just did a price gouging bill. They're like, the ability to go after gas companies if they are price gouging. Look, I'm obviously against price gouging, okay? But that's not the point. The point is that we're obviously going to need to partner here with industry in order to drill and frack more in order to increase supply. And there's a variety of other things that you can do. But if you don't affect anything on the supply side, then you're actually just guaranteeing gas shortages. This is like, okay, cool. You know, there's no artful thinking as to getting to the bottom of these problems.
And I want to get to that priority list. There's a good Pew poll that we'll talk about in a second. But I want to hit the second part of this discussion, which is just the tech and crypto crash specifically. Right. I think this is the big thing that needs to matter. Like, look, on a couple of different levels, this podcast is not financial advice. Don't take 50 different levels. Like, do not take us that seriously. Yeah. But I think what you and I can do, though, is I think we're good at the macro, the bigger picture thing. And I think the way people need to understand this, there's a good post put out by Nathan Bechez, friend of the show, who runs a subscription bundle news publication. He did a good post where he basically talked about how we should understand this era in a couple of different ways. So one, there is obviously just COVID. COVID happens, and then you have Zoom, stock price blows up. You have Peloton, stock price blows up. You have all these companies that were primed for the COVID era, just totally crushing it, totally growing up. Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, like all the things you could basically list there, the whole Web3 conversation, all of that just goes up. And the way that people are sort of telling this to, dunk on Matt Damon for a second is the high was really just like earlier in the year, a couple quarters ago, when you really had, the whole fortune favors the brave crypto.com conversation. You had, a Staples Center in LA being renamed to the crypto arena. That was just the high. And since then, everything has just collapsed. The prices of cryptocurrencies have collapsed. There have been some major major, which I want to actually bring an expert on to talk about some of like the like broader conversations of like the crypto crash part, but there's been big things happening there. And then on a deeper level, I think, and this is something I'd love to get back and forth with you on, Saagar, we're just seeing the fact that the past 2 years were an aberration and it's getting back to normal. It turns out that Zoom, which we're not even recording this on, Zoom's stock price is basically near where it was before COVID. Because guess what? Like at the end of the day, I like Zoom. Zoom helped us with everything we do, but it's not that different than Riverside, which is what we're recording this on now. There's Squadcast. As people have pointed out, and this is such a smart point because I don't think this way because I'm not a product or organization man person, but someone says the problem for Zoom is that they basically cannot raise their prices too much because what does every single office function on? Microsoft Office. And there's this product that's bundled with that called Microsoft Teams. Now, Teams isn't fashionable. It's not cool. I don't find it quite as intuitive as Zoom is. Definitely for like personal life, obviously. It's kind of a bummer when someone sends you a Microsoft Teams notification. But if you are running a company or you're running like a department, the second that Zoom raises its prices too much, because it's not that differentiated a service from Teams aside from just the vibes, you're going to start using Teams because it's bundled in with the Microsoft service you already use. It's bundled with Microsoft Word. It's bundled with Microsoft Excel. All these things your companies are doing, I raise. So it's seeing that crash down. Same thing with Peloton. I mean, I'd love to hear your take on this, Saagar, because as everyone who follows you on Instagram knows, you've been getting more into fitness. One of my first perceptions that a lot of people just didn't understand this COVID moment as I was listening to the Pivot podcast with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, and they were talking about how, you know, this was in June 2020, like, oh, like we love Peloton. I hate going to the gym. The gym is dirty. You know, this is just a total shit. So I'm like, no, like the gym has been packed.
Yeah.
The gym has been packed. We both own Pelotons. I like my Peloton, but there is just no world where I'm getting a Peloton like strength workout program and the bike and maybe like a couple like running workouts and not going to the gym. I mean, how do you think about that?
I just think that it comes down to the fact that in person is just literally always going to be better. And look, I track my stuff religiously. At home workouts, look, if you're really disciplined and you're really good, you can get it done. But gyms exist for a reason. Not only do they have a ton more equipment, it's very motivational in order to be around people. You know, on Wednesdays, I work out beginning at 6 a.m. at my gym. It's packed to the gills. Packed to the gills.
Really? Indeed. And here's the thing. People should know this too. This gym is in DC.
Yeah, downtown Washington, DC.
And that means something. Like 6 a.m. DC.
Downtown Washington, DC. In the office area. And it is absolutely packed to the gills between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. I think there's a reason for that. And it's not just equipment. It's like being around other people, working out. Like or I'll tell you what, I just got an ice bath. Here's a good one. By the way, it's very, very difficult. Shout out to the cold plunge. Okay. So I do my ice bath by myself. I swear it's just not as good. This morning, a friend came over. We did 3 rounds. At the exact time that we needed. There's something just like being and working out and doing stuff with other people that pushes you into a better dimension. And look, we're hardwired that way. I think it should stay that way. And I just think a lot of the bets that people made against that aren't going to work. I mean, on crypto, this is an interesting one too, right? Like, which is crypto is supposed to be the hedge against total catastrophe. And now it's just, you know, basically acting like a normal tech stock. Now, I like Bitcoin. You know, I think decentralization is cool. I think that some of the promises on censorship and all that stuff are awesome, but I've never been a true believer like trying to track the price of Bitcoin on M2 money supply. So I always enjoy like watching Bitcoin.
That was a very niche reference. Can you explain what you're referencing with the M2 money supply?
There is a basic premise. And I mean, this goes down to the foundation of Bitcoin, that Bitcoin was created as a response to the 2008 financial crisis, decentralized money, and that it itself is a hedge against inflation and against, you know, the collapse of the world. So theoretically, if it's a hedge against inflation, then when inflation goes up, Bitcoin should be when inflation goes up, then Bitcoin should also go up. But, you know, we just had record inflation. Bitcoin just went 50% in half, and it basically tracks the S&P 500 and with the NASDAQ. So it's like, well, what is happening here? look, it's clearly a speculative asset. It's clearly on the more risky side of the investment. It's clearly something that's entered, financialization, day trading, and all of that, which is not something I believe in. I've never sold Bitcoin one time for several years. But my point that I'm making is that there's a lot of myths that are being busted here. And so on the one hand, I'm really upset. I'm sad for people, not on the Bitcoin side necessarily. I mean, look, maybe I am sad for them. There are some people, you sent me this about like suicide hotlines being posted in subreddits for people who lost all their money in Terra USD, which for context, everybody, was a stable coin, which is pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar and plunged to like 50 cents or whatever on the dollar. And a lot of people lost like everything they had.
Everything.
Now, if you literally had listened to anyone, they'd probably tell you like, hey, that's a really bad idea. You should not do that, which, I would tell you again, I don't get financial advice.
Would you put everything into one individual stock?
No,
I've so don't do that with, so don't do that with this.
Don't do that. But I feel really bad for those people. I do think though, this is going to cause an immense shakeout as to real companies are actually going to get funded. Whoever makes it out of this, they're for real. And I think there's a reason that Uber was born in 2008. Airbnb was born in 2008. Some of the best, biggest companies in Silicon Valley were born in the middle of the worst recession at that time, in people's lifetimes. So, there's a lot of froth and maybe it deserved to go.
Yeah, and the key thing to your story is it's not just 2008 you should reference. It's also the dot-com bubble in 2000. Amazon made it through. Pets.com, there were literally like 3 or 4 different like pet delivery services. Pre-Chewy and all of the current companies that have figured it out a little better. They didn't survive, but Amazon did survive. So, Google survives the dot-com bubble. PayPal just did an episode on that. That obviously survives it too. So it's just really important to think that there's just been this 2-year period where there was just so much money and the meme stocks were just so hot that you basically did not have to select for that quality level. I'm going to keep referencing Derek Thompson because he's been doing really great work. He did a great episode of his podcast. I'll link this in the show notes too, with Jason Calacanis, where they're talking through all this. So you could talk with 2 people a little more expert on this, but that's huge. And then finally, look, this also plays into the Netflix story because like Netflix is not doing well. And, there's this whole conversation about how streaming, how it's going to change everything. So it's, there's actually a new book on the streaming wars that's coming out that I want to book for the show. Cause it's like a side topic that has big, it's actually on my Audible account. If you want to, it's good. If you want to take a listen, it is Binge Times. It's kind of funny because the way they set this up, we're going to send a guest pitch now. The way they set this up, they started the book in 2019 when they noticed, hey, like it turns out that literally everyone and their cousin is launching a streaming service during this 7-month period. They're launching Quibi, they're launching Paramount Plus, they're launching Peacock, they're launching HBO Max, like all these huge launches. So they're already writing the book. And then COVID happens. So there's actually like 2 different stories that perfectly intersect there. And there's just really something that it really matters for folks. Let's do 2 quick fun things before we get to the serious stuff then in the last third of the episode. Where do you stand on streaming service shakeout? Like, what are you happy with? What are you unhappy with? What's irrelevant to you?
I will say I am devastated that Netflix is just going to become a run-of-the-mill service and said that they're going to open up ads in 2023. I mean, that's just devastating. Like, I'll never forget the first time I ever watched something on Netflix, and I was like, this is awesome. I was like, no ads. You get to just watch whatever you want. I don't even remember what I binged, to be honest, but it was cool.
I mean, back then, everything was on Netflix.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like, awesome. What didn't you binge on Netflix?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was one of I think I was like 18 whenever that happened, and the first time I ever used it. It was so cool. So the idea that the internet is basically just going to return to fucking cable in terms of having to sit through ads, and you still have to pay. So it's like now I have. We've got Peacock, Disney Plus, Netflix, Hulu. So now you're going to have watch ads on every single one of those platforms. I mean, I guess you could theoretically pay for like the non-ad version, but at that point, I mean, why not just have cable? And so That is really devastating. I don't know. I feel really sad about the decline of Netflix. I think Netflix is an incredible company. They literally invented the genre, but it also, look, it's a story of IP. At the end of the day, Disney has got 209 million subscribers. We're almost up to Netflix in only half, or not even half, 1/5 the amount of time. You know why? Because Disney's awesome, man. If you have kids, you probably cannot survive without a Disney subscription. And I think maybe if one of the mistakes that Netflix made is they did not have must-see IP. So not even necessarily in existing products, although of course that mattered, and that's something that they definitely did. I mean, like previously made movies, but some of their stuff has just been a lot of chaff that they've been pumping out for a long time. And if I had been over there, I would have said we should try and pursue a more HBO. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention HBO Max. Guess why I'm not going to give up HBO Max? These people cannot miss,
this
man.
This podcast loves HBO. I would, if gun to my head, and I want listeners to think about this, I would drop everything, keep HBO Max, and then guess
HBO Max
what? I would have a pretty good time with that.
Yeah, they don't miss. Every show they put out, awesome. We Own the City. Shout out to Bernthal, by the way. We Own the City, incredible show. Euphoria, amazing. Righteous Gemstones, incredible. Like every single thing they do.
And they've got good old stuff. So like they've got The Sopranos, TCM, they've got The Wire.
Exactly. Right. Oh, yeah. Man. Everything they put out is gold. And so I don't know. I feel like Netflix just went for the cheap stuff that they could pump out. Look, they have some great original IP. Obviously, they invented House of Cards, all of that, but they really drifted away from that
funny story.
Production model.
Fun fact: they did not invent House of Cards, and this is controversial.
Really?
This is actually very important because
was it a production company?
House of Cards was made through the traditional. You put together a show and you sell it to studios. This is why that isn't just a niche point and super matters. What Saagar's basically getting at with like We Own This City and Euphoria is that now that there's all these diffuse streaming services and everyone who, if you own something, you've taken it to your own thing. So if you are like Amazon, they bought MGM, James Bond films are not going to be on Netflix much longer, I would bet.
Right.
Disney is now off Netflix. All these companies recognize that they propped up Netflix for years by letting them have their choice stuff and then going from there. So the key skill set now is, do you own strong IP? So once again, I subscribe to Peacock, honestly, because of The Office. The uncut episodes are very, very good. It's very
also
fun. They have an
Yellowstone.
extra 10 to 15.
Shout out to Yellowstone.
Yeah. So exactly, like internally generated IP, or is it that you already owned, or like you said at Yellowstone, you could make new hits. And the key thing is Netflix, other than Stranger Things, there aren't actually that, and obviously like you have Bridgerton, Shonda Land, like all. I know you're not a huge Shonda fan, but that's still like a big show.
I can't stand Shonda.
They have not been able to at scale produce those big original things. Guess what, guys? I know that there's I'm not sure if there's a single person who will feel sad about this, but Bright. Remember Bright with Will Smith and Joel Edgerton with the orc and the cop and everything? Came out in 2018. It did really well. Well, sequel just got canceled because of the slaps. There was a lot of the slap at the Oscars, so there's a lot of fallout. But at a core level, they just produce so much, but it's just not good. Versus HBO Max and Disney Plus, what they've done is a system where they're like, look, we don't have to produce a new series every single day. Instead, let's just produce something of higher quality that keeps people going. And it's just Netflix never figured out how to do what they needed to be able to do that at scale. They needed to say look, we're not just, because like you said, Saagar, you just named 3 shows that you like on HBO Max. Netflix needs to be able to say, we just did 20 shows and that's what they can't do. Okay. So then last 2 topics. So question for you, Saagar. I'm doing an event with Charlie Warzel in New York next week on the future of The Office. We did an episode last December. Folks enjoyed it. So we're going to do a moderated conversation 6 months later on what people think the future of The Office is. Help me do my homework for me. Just what is your personal relationship with The Office? And then what is your broad recommendation for anyone who works in real estate or is someone who's trying to figure out their own personal relationship with it?
I love The Office. I think offices are really important. I do think that mid 2000s office culture is bad, as in being a slave to the office, having to go to 9 to 5. I think pure work from home is also really bad. And if I were running a company where I had people in the office, I would not require necessarily, but I think a 3 day a week split is the best of all worlds. 5 days a week is genuinely exhausting, and it's annoying if you have to go and run certain types of errands. At the same time, 2 days a week or 1 day a week just seems really light in terms of any of the benefits of like intermixing office and all of that. So I am a massive proponent of the flex model. So like a 60-40 split. I think being able to work 40% of your time from home is a pretty freaking good deal, personally. Because that gives you the ability to, like, you could go to the bank or whatever, just take care of stuff that has always been really annoying to schedule, doctor's appointments, etc., without any of the hassle. And you get all the benefits of working in an office. When, of course, like, if you're building or working on something different, then, maybe full time in the office is a good thing. So that's just like my general thesis. My theory on offices is that things are actually probably going to shake out for the worse for the vast majority of people. So let me explain, which is that I live in DC. DC is a fake city. Nobody here actually has to work. It's complete bullshit. Nobody here makes any money. Like, it's all a nonprofit industrial complex, which relies on donations. So nobody's ever going back to the office because these people, they don't need to. Like,
it's artificial.
Yeah, it's complete fake.
They don't totally do anything. Socially constructed.
They don't do anything in the office or at home, so it doesn't matter, right? They can run their entire company or fake nonprofit or whatever from wherever. And so now that they've tasted that, they're never going back in ever. The traffic sucks. Downtown DC sucks too. There's not a lot of good restaurants, businesses, whatever. So it's not exactly a fun place to be. Now, New York, Chicago, LA, all these people, I think everybody who works in a city who is oriented around money, they have to go back. And you already see this, which is that there's a reason creative types who work in the entertainment movie business, they've been back, not in the office or on set for like over a year and a half now. You have to have in-person collaboration. It's not possible in order to make this stuff happen. New York, I was in downtown Manhattan. It was humming, man. There was a lot of people around. You know why? People got to go to work. Like, if you're running a capitalist enterprise, having people who are just purely working from home is a waste of human capital, and B, is just really cuts down on so many of the things that make great businesses run, create new products, create new ideas. Now, my only counter to this are purely bureaucratic organizations. So government. What's a good example of a corporation that probably never needs to go back to the office? Microsoft. Those people just make, they just print money off of their licensing. Maybe a core part of their team, but like, they have $2 trillion or whatever. They're just like a behemoth that just hums along. I think Google, to a limited extent, also probably never has to go back to the office. Twitter, famously went work from home forever. Facebook, those, these people, like, they're not really creating, innovating a lot of stuff. They're just like working on a massive behemoth and just keeping the trains running on time. I think that type of work can definitely be done from home. This is why, actually, if you think about it, the ultimate work from home guy has always been the IT guy, because it's always just like one of those things where, like, yeah, he can tap into everything from home. So, he doesn't really need to like be there. It's just like a backstop. So any backstop type function, I think that can always be from home. But anything that requires real work, I think you have to go to the office, personally. Yeah.
The thing that I just came down to, we're doing a lot of shilling for people who don't sponsor the podcast. But when I was talking to Charlie during our pre-call, what I've concluded is I'm going to start doing a WeWork hot desk flex pass, where you pay $300 a month, and you could basically get access to most WeWorks in the world. You don't have like a dedicated office space, but you have everything, you have all the work. And I'm just going to go there 1 day a week. I'm not going to take meetings that day. I'm not going to record podcasts that day. I'm not going to do like Breaking Points YouTube things. I'm just going to like work and send my emails. And what Charlie said that was actually very motivational, he said, what makes sense about that articulation is how much actual work do you actually, as an individual and listener, think, if you're a white collar listener, I'm sorry, blue collar listeners, how much actual dedicated, I need to focus work do you have a day? It's basically 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah,
we're not counting Zoom meeting. We're not counting Zoom meetings. We're not talking, screw around time by the water cooler. We're not talking idle browsing. Like, how much do you actually need to focus? Like on, I was on a train on, what was this? On Wednesday. And I was like, oh, I need to send 3 booking requests for the realignment. We've taped our episodes and write an intro. Took me 40 minutes. That's 40 minutes there. And then there's other jobs. But basically, Charlie's like, if you basically just batch all of your actual work during a specific day of the week, that would really work for me. So like, that's the personal way that I'm thinking about this. But once again, I think everyone should really just be thinking hard about this, because Saagar, my reaction to these stories where people literally say, like, I refuse to ever go in to the office ever. My conclusion is what that's really demonstrating is that you don't actually like your employer. Like I just do not buy that younger people especially don't actually ever want to go into the office. Like all these people who are saying like, so for example, Apple has announced they're doing 3 days a week. 3 days a week making Apple's salary is like you're at the height of human civilizational existence. Yet there's still like vast protests. And look, like not to dunk on people who can't respond, but I guess to dunk on people who can't respond. It seems pretty clear that you're just someone who like realized you could make high 6 figures and not have to really
not work that
do
hard.
anything. Yeah, and your vibe has been checked. Versus if you were actually motivated and like, for example, Saagar, like if I were in DC, wait, you do breaking points 3 days a week in office. If I were in DC, I'd come in 3 days a week for breaking points. That's the realignment, because this is what we care about. Like we're motivated. So I think if you really cannot find it within yourself to come into the office, and once again, like we're obviously excluding people with serious COVID issues. Like we're just talking like normal. Geez, not trying to be rude. We're talking like you're just your average like boosted and vaccinated.
By the way,
American.
this is a white collar problem too. So let's be honest. Like most people who are working class, you guys have been going into work this entire time, and that's why I also find this entire conversation just so bullshit. I'm like, most people have been going into work this entire time. You're crying about having to go in 2 to 3 days a week. That is a privilege. All right. Shut up. Anyway, look, go ahead.
And I just want to add something real quick, but here's why this, because I'm glad you put it that way. So it's sort of like, we definitely have some listeners who are like, okay, guys, like your white collar bullshit, does this matter or not? Here's why this matters. Entire cities, New York, Chicago, LA, DC, are constructed around people going into the office. That's why this conversation matters. So for example, like if you're a blue collar person or you're working in the service industry, that's dependent on people coming in. It's crazy. People coming in from Long Island into New York is just totally collapsed. And there's so much so there's an ecosystem that's impacted beyond just the personal feelings of people. What were you saying?
Oh, I just think that the main key here is that people need to remember, and I talk about this with the stock market. People are like, why should I care about the stock market? You may not make money on the way up, but you will lose money on the way down, because large institutional capital runs this world, whether you like it or not. So if they have liquidity problems, you're going to lose your job, or you're going to get less hours, or you're going to have less opportunities. And it's the same way here, which is that the way that white collar people structure that, I'm not saying this is a good thing, by the way, I'm just telling you how it is. The way that white collar people structure their days and their livelihoods, that is obviously going to, there were a lot of restaurants I used to go to when I would work downtown 5 days a week. They're all closed. They're dead, gone. There are breakfast places. There was this one Korean American family which owned all these breakfast buffets and all this stuff, which was always open during the office. It was literally like the king of the office culture. Those places, last time I checked, every single one of them is shut down. I feel terrible for those folks that, they structure their whole business, their whole lives around that. So that's kind of what, we're getting at here, which is there was a whole service industry that also catered towards that. What are those people going to do? I honestly don't know.
So for our last section, we'll do a quick Ukraine news run through. So number one, the biggest news of all, I remember when we recorded the last discussion episode, we're like, hey, this is coming out before Russia's Victory Day parade on the 9th.
Nothing
Maybe
happened.
Everything will blow up. We're still here. It didn't blow up. I think I'm curious what you think about this, Saagar. I really genuinely wonder why the Russians continue to so aggressively bring up the nuclear issue and the escalation issue, because
it's just a reminder.
But my thing is like, I actually think it's like not working. I think we're actually reaching. I think we're actually reaching the point where, because look, here's the obvious strategic reality of what's happening here. And like you said, Saagar, I'm gonna be brave like you and like give a specific take about how I think about this. Russia is not going to nuke anybody. They're not going to do it. However, they calculated very early. What's up?
You mean preemptively, right?
Yeah, they're not. Like, look, we'll get to this in a second. But Sweden and Finland are going to, get into NATO soon. They're not going to nuke anybody. They're not going to nuke anyone over Javelin arms transfers. They're just not going to do it because very early on, they calculated very clearly that. And let's put aside the whole escalate to de-escalate, Russian willingness to use a nuclear weapon bit. They, at a leadership level, are comfortable talking about nuclear war at a level that just the West and Western allies are not comfortable doing. There is just no world where Joe Biden is going to throw around the words like nuclear. Funnily enough, who was tolerant of throwing that around? President Trump was. Mm-hmm. That's what Fire and Fury with North Korea was in reference to. But in terms of this administration, the Russians just have much more tolerance for referencing nuclear war. So what you're basically seeing happen is the Russians calculated, hey, by saying and invoking the use of nuclear weapons as much as possible, we will just artificially constrain how the West thinks about these things. And they're just not going to do it. And I think that was the proper strategy. That was like a good move on their part. But Medvedev, the former Russian president, is just becoming a clown because every other day he's now saying, if the West does X, there could be a nuclear war. You cannot just say that every single day because it's just making too clear what the actual strategy is, especially as the conflict gets further and further and further.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. You just don't know, right? That's it. Look, they're full of shit until they're not full of shit. So we just have no idea. And, the 10% chance that they're not full of shit is enough that I still think you should take it seriously. That being said, yeah, look, I mean, they're losing a lot of credibility. And that's part of the reason that the nuclear deterrent is supposed to be so carefully managed and why I was critical of a lot of U.S. policy, which had a lot of hubris in the beginning, was I thought that we were not being responsible. And obviously, they're doing the exact same thing. They're throwing it out constantly. Oh, we're going to have the doomsday plane. It's just like, well, okay, well, you've threatened it 20 times.
What is the doomsday plane?
They were supposed to have a nuclear doomsday plane on March at the May 9th parade, and they grounded it at the last second, right? So it's like still actually.
So that, and just for context, the doomsday plane, this is why it's a specially modified Soviet era plane. It's supposed to be their nuclear command center that Putin would fly on in case of nuclear war. So before the actual parade, people were like, oh shoot, like them having it out there would be a massive. So you said they talked about having it, but they didn't have it.
They said they were going to do it, and then they just withdrew it at the very last moment.
This is what I'm talking about.
No. Look, I agree with you, but you can't be so triumphalist to say that it's never going to happen, Marshall. You don't know that, okay? And then that's fair. Point. There's 100 million lives at stake here.
No, there's 100 million lives at stake. I'm just saying at this because look, like once again, like I think most people just basically fear this. Look, and as you know, people get so butthurt when I make this point, but I specifically did not favor MiG-29s. I specifically do not favor calling it a genocide. I specifically do not favor a no-fly zone. I think that qualifies as actually crossing the red lines for Russia. All I am basically saying is I've had friends and you have these same friends too, who will text me like, oh my God, like, I don't think we're going to wake up next week. I'm like, no,
that's
as
crazy.
long as we don't escalate. My point is basically as long as the status quo is maintained, AKA no aggressive NATO boots on the ground, no fly zone, and nothing in terms of that forward-facing aggression. Like we are very clearly operating within the lines. They've cataloged that. And I just don't think it makes any sense for Russia from a pure safety perspective to continue to overuse that rhetoric when very clearly they are, I don't want to say fine with the status quo, but the status quo fits what the norm in international conflict has been, which is, okay, as long as you are not personally putting your own troops on the ground, you can send weapons. We could send weapons into Afghanistan. They could send weapons into Vietnam and Korea. That's how it works. And so once again, as long as those are being adhered to, don't throw around the term nuclear weapon every other day, because all it's going to serve, to your point, Saagar, is, I don't think I'm being triumphalist. I think I'm just calling out what the truth here is, which is they have no intention of nuking a supply train. They are only saying this because they think it scares us. And it should scare us. But I just think we should be I'm just personally comfortable being stating what I think a lot of people at a policymaking level already feel, which is that it's literally bluster. And we actually do have a good perception of when it actually is real, which is, once again, destroying anti-aircraft emplacements in Russia proper would obviously be escalatory. And at that point, That's where I'm just like, whoa, 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 whoa. I would not trust that at all. So I'm purely talking about in the status quo that we're going to see for the next several years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think we're at the some people apparently got mad when I said it's going to be a mid-grade war. They're like, people still die. I'm like, I'm not saying that people aren't dying, but there's a big difference between a massive global war and I said a mid-grade regional conflict. Would you disagree with that characterization?
Yeah, I think people, and this is the problem. So,
it's a mid-grade
to pat you on the back of the head for a second, like, people, Saagar, like, literally studied strategy and operations for his master's degree. So he's going to talk about this stuff in a technical way. Like, when you say mid-grade war, that is obviously not a moral, you are not making a moral assessment.
I didn't say it's a good thing.
That, thousands and thousands of people are going to continue to die. But I think the point that you're making is a lot of what drove your thinking at the start of the war was, okay, is this so? For a perfect example, and this actually came up on the episode that was released on Friday the 13th with Christopher Blattman. To his point, there, we talk about how World War I happened in the Balkans, and this tiny thing escalated. Chris's point is that there were actually literally 20 to 50 other Balkan incidents for 200 years before that. So the question here that people should be saying is hey, is this going to lead to World War I?
Which is what my fear was. Yeah.
And very reasonable. Or to your point, once again, those 20 to 50 Balkan conflicts were devastating and bad and terrible. And once again, laid the seeds for that final conflict. So that's not to dismiss them. That obviously played a huge role in the, genocide in Yugoslavia, post in the, Balkans in the 1990s. But the point is, when you say mid-grade war, you are just referring to the fact this is not going to be a global conflict. At this point in the game, no one sees a world where Russian tanks are rolling into Poland, or Joe Biden wakes up and says, we have to save Mariupol. We're sending in F-35s. That just is clearly off the table.
Yeah. I just don't think people really, again, I'm not making a moral judgment here, but the amount of people who've been killed in this conflict is less than 25,000. And, that qualifies.
You mean it's less than 50,000 because the Russians are probably at 25,000.
I don't know. That's pretty high. I don't know if they're at 25. Look, I don't know what their conflict is. The official number is 25,000. So, okay, let's say 35, 40. Let's go even maximal.
Well, because I just want to be precise about this, right? Because people are going to play gotcha. The number that the West is using right now is the Russians have sustained 25,000 casualties. Mm-hmm. We do not know what the Ukrainian number is.
Yeah, and they've lied about it pretty significantly. I think a 1-to-1 ratio is probably fair. Okay, let's say it's even 70.
Let's say 75,000.
That's still not that many people. I mean, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of a global conflict, which is 75,000 is really bad. I mean, over 500,000 died in Syria. 75,000, that's what you would lose on the Western Front in 2 or 3 days. So is this bigger than Iraq? Yeah, it's a lot bigger than Iraq on the American side. But if you consider the casualties, well, we're kind of in a similar type conflict. More what I'm pointing to, and that's why you use precise language like mid-grade, is I'm this is a regional conflict of which, yes, the West is involved, and we should and can debate the extent of involvement. But in terms of a massive global conflagration, of which I was genuinely fearful of, that does not seem to be on the table. And I think that the situation will sustain itself now for many years to come. And I didn't say that's a good thing, but that's what I think is going to happen. And that is, it's a tragedy if you live there, but it has all kinds of downstream effects, and that should just impact the way people have analysis. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't know. I just feel people are you're writing off. I'm listen,
was this on Breaking Points or something?
I saw somebody sent me this very nasty email about not just one. I saw a couple where it was you're writing off the sack. I'm listen, I'm not, but I'm considering it in a much broader, grand strategic context where I honestly think 3 months from now, nobody's going to talk about Ukraine or think about Ukraine all that much. And this last big aid package, which I was against, but I think that it will probably be the last big one for decades. Or for years. I don't see any reason why they would even need it.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be a large economic reconstruction package, but in
Yeah, but
terms
that's
of like
different.
specific,
I'm talking about weapons and
so
ammo.
to be precise,
Yeah.
like, so what you mean is like that's going to be the last, almost, but I think the one thing I'll just, as we wrap this, I'll just like push back a little bit on, like, I've heard a lot of folks. Oh, actually, I do want to do a quick thing here. Like, because it's foreign policy, like I don't really care whether people are thinking about it or not, because like like I get what you're saying, but like for me, the metric with Ukraine like isn't like, are people thinking about it actively every day? Because unlike inflation, unlike a lot of these other issues, like this is actually something that the administration has pretty strong unitary control over because of the nature of the presidency. But I do want to say a quick note on the $40 billion aid package. So you don't support it. I support it. I ran into a listener, shout out Ian, at a wedding last weekend, and he was talking about it. And he was talking about a meme that really annoyed me. And I think you and I will probably be synced up on this, where he was like, he opposes the aid package. Whatever, people would think what they want to think about that. And he said, as a counterpoint, couldn't that money be better spent on Philadelphia, LA, and San Francisco? And I understand what someone's saying in the hypothetical, but that response usually grinds my gears isn't the right word to put it, but I think it just misunderstands how the system works, because like it assumes there's a world where like Rand Paul is like, okay, guys, here's the deal. I was super down to, because like the reason why this was going on, there was a tweet that someone put out where it was a video of a really dilapidated part of Philadelphia, lots of homeless people, like open fires. And they're like, we're spending $40 billion on Ukraine, but not spending this on this at home. I'm like, look, dude, I know for 100% fact, Rand Paul would also vote against $40 billion for Philly. So I don't want to pretend. Let me put it this way. If actually we lived in a politics where let's say there's just $40 billion and 100% of people are down to spend it on something, and the debate is, do we put that into Ukraine or Philadelphia? But that's not what we live in. So I really don't like that comparison.
Let me explain his frustration, which I share. There's an overwhelming bipartisan consensus. And remember, by the way, the Biden administration only asked for $33 billion. I don't exactly know where this extra $7 came from, but the Biden administration only wanted $33 billion for this. There was an overwhelming bipartisan action in order to get this immediately passed through the Senate. And what he's talking about is that there is no overwhelming bipartisan consensus on doing literally anything else. I think that's a huge problem, right? So I support sending weapons to Ukraine. My problem with this current aid package is I think it gives Biden way too much ability in order to have discretion over the exact type of weapon systems that go over. I think there should be congressional approval. And that's part of why I'm against it, which is that, and here's the other problem. $40 billion of what? Nobody ever tells you. There's a specific $11 billion appropriation to Biden that allows him to send whatever existing U.S. military equipment that he personally wants to as commander-in-chief over to Ukraine. I would like to have congressional approval to make sure that we don't have a MiG-29 system going over there that's based upon the whims of the administration, and have some sort of congressional input on that decision. I still think it would get rubber stamped, but I would like the process to work out that way. So let me just explain it very clearly on that. What he's getting at is that there is an overwhelming bipartisan consensus that this has to go through, and not only go through. When is the last time Congress appropriated more money for something than somebody asked for? That's crazy. So what he's pointing to is that there is massive push towards that. And this is why I do think it is fair, which is that Washington is incensed about the fact that Rand Paul is objecting to the Ukraine war aid. Okay, you can think he's an asshole or whatever on that. But Washington is not incensed, the political class, and all of my neighbors who have all these Ukrainian flags or whatever and all this in there, let's be honest, like they don't actually care about the baby formula crisis or about a lot of this diesel gas. No, that is true.
No.
That's true. Absolutely.
No, because this is what my beef is.
No, this is what I'm getting at. That's true. Then show me one bill that's put on the floor. One.
That's just
there isn't one.
Okay, once again, you took that from the fact that there isn't a specific piece of legislation relating to a complicated issue versus like, okay, here's what the beef is.
Well, I mean, Ukraine is complicated too. Why do they need that extra $7 billion in weapons aid? What does Congress know that the Biden administration knows? Nothing, by the way.
Okay, so like, once again, though, my beef with the assumption is that the Biden administration would be totally, if you, what's Ian, I'm speaking to you real quick. any amount of money that you would specifically like name should be spent on cities would almost certainly be fine with the Biden administration. Josh, we went over this a couple months ago.
Yeah,
Josh
no
Hawley's
one's saying that people are full of shit.
This is my beef. My beef is
fine. Let's find that out. Let's actually have.
But we do know that. We do know that. Like Mitch McConnell is very clearly opposed to domestic economic spending that benefits blue states.
I would love to see him actually be put on the record in order to go against something like that.
He has been against the record. He votes against.
Fine, then good. Then that should be something that the administration should actually make a point of. My point is that Washington's priorities here are very clearly. I mean, look, I just told you the administration tells me literally on television that they've been aware of this since February. Well, there's not an overwhelming consensus, outcry, or whatever in terms of institutional DC in order to make sure that that gets fixed. DC is all about responding towards internal pressures. Are Republicans full of shit? Yeah, absolutely. Am I disputing that? None whatsoever. But it also tells you about the pathologies of some of the Democratic leadership there, where, as from what I can tell, Pelosi, Schumer, all these other people have done nothing on many of the issues that I just listed that are directly impacting a lot of people, and put pressure on the administration where the billions in aid to Ukraine gets rubber stamped with bipartisan domestic approval. Maybe you can support that. But what I'm saying is I would like to see and I think Ian, and I think what a lot of other people are trying to point towards, is that there is no overwhelming consensus debate, impetus response in order to get something done on those major political issues. And I will 100% stand by the statement that the people who live in my neighborhood, who are quite wealthy, do not genuinely care about the gas crisis.
How do you?
Or about
but this is my
because
thing. Like,
there's not any actual there's no outcry about it. The people they're wealthy enough in order to afford it. They don't particularly care in order to they can absorb the cost. Putin's price hike, these are the only people in the world who would actually believe it. And I think that they're the most influential people in the world who create the incentives in media and for the political system, and thus nothing gets done on it. And I think that's a huge problem.
No, dude, this is total bullshit. Like, once again, Mitch McConnell does not give two shits what your neighbors say about these issues.
I'm not talking about Mitch McConnell.
Neither does Joe
I'm
Manchin.
talking about elite liberalism.
But this is my point, though. You are acting. So, like, once again, like, I do not understand what's in Build Back Better. I'm sure there's like a whole other debate we could have about that. Well, no, but here's the thing. Like, if we were to, like, if let's say we brought like a administration show on the show to explain, to go through the things we're talking about, almost certainly there would be some aspect of Build Back Better that would impact it. I am sure there is some part of Build Back Better that could directionally be related to the issue of domestic manufacturing.
But why is that a counter to what I'm saying? I'm talking about political pressure and about incentives.
But my point is, the thing that's stopping that isn't MSNBC boomer libs. It's Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and Mitch McConnell. So all my point is, like, I get, and I appreciate your articulation of this, of like, I totally get that someone should look at DC and be pissy, and not pissy, that's demeaning to people who are ticked off about this. I totally get looking at DC and saying, man, this is just like status quo is just unacceptable. It's not together. This, and that. My problem though, and look, like, I'm just being a little partisan here, if that belief and dissatisfaction in Washington leads people to conclude the reason why you're not seeing this domestic spending is the fact that MSNBC boomer limbs are cringe, when rather it's that, like, Mitch McConnell explicitly and the vast majority of his caucus explicitly disapproves of this, that is misleading and unhelpful.
Oh, I think that's fair.
And frankly, that's the environment. Look, there's a reason why, Alec, why there's a literal biography of him that's called The Cynic. Like, this is actually the way that he actually works. Like, he wants people to basically think this way. So all I'm just saying is, like,
too. Yeah, go ahead. Which is that you're all going to find out. A lot of you people out there posting memes, 81 million votes, Democrats, you are going to find out real quick what Republican economic policy at its core really means for a lot of you. When you see government shutdowns, runaway inflation on the supply side, lack of investment, blocking the Biden administration, and legislative chaos in the economy, not to mention pushing people who want to jack interest rates even higher. I think we're going to have a full-blown recession if a Republican becomes president, because they're just going to follow a lot of this. So I want to be clear here too about, listen, if you think that voting for the establishment GOP is a way to fix a lot of the chaos that we have or the baby formula crisis, I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene tweet. I talked about this on the show. I said, all right, Marjorie, I'm going to hold you. We should hold you to that. If there's a policy on baby formula, you better fucking vote for it. Or Madison Cawthorn.
Oh, it's talk. Yes, good.
Yeah,
talk
the veterans thing. He was like, we could have sent that to veterans. He literally voted against a $20 billion bill against veterans. So this is what I'm pointing to. I'm not saying these people aren't full of shit. I would love, though, to expose a lot more of that. And my biggest critique here on the Biden.
Why doesn't it resonate? So Saagar, here's a question, though. And this is like, you're the guru of YouTube. Why doesn't that stuff seem to scale?
I know why. This is the simple, because the Biden people are dumb, and because of the way this all works is, like you said, Build Back Better. You can't name any of that shit for a reason, because there's a bunch of industry groups that cobble all this stuff together, and they're like 3.5 trillion, no, 2.8. It's like, of what? Of what program? So the fact is that we cobble stuff together so that all of this just gets lost in the muck, and you don't actually have any idea what gets cut, what doesn't, etc. If we actually had to vote on up or down bills, which did happen one time very recently with COVID. What was it? Stimulus checks. All right. That was the only time actually single piece type legislation came to the floor. And then a lot of people couldn't vote against it. That's the reason. Republicans do this. Democrats do this. It's a big problem with the reconciliation process. And it's just wonky, but it gets into like the process parts of the Senate. And the move away from up or down votes on single things really ended with the Iraq War after people suffered consequences. And since then, they basically just try and mire a lot of what they do on the floor so that they have no accountability. It's all about pushing like responsibility away from them and making it amorphous. It's a huge part also, by the way, to Ian, of why DC seems so broken.
Well, we went from stock market, crypto, fun stuff on Netflix to depressing Ukraine, and our political system is incredibly dysfunctional. So, we'll leave it there, but this is a continual conversation. Let us know what you think. We're going to do another one of these week after next. So just keep the thoughts coming. And of course, if you can, support us on Supercast. We will see you next time.
Please support the show, guys. It really helps with the production cost and all of this, and just gives us overall longevity. Look, the economic crisis comes for everybody, and especially inflation and all that stuff too, on travel or any of the other plans that we want to be able to scale up, electronics, these types of things. So that's what you guys are helping fund, and it really, 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 really helps.